It's also a very rash and ambitious thing to do, but it's what I decided. And then my mom said, well, if you're going to become Prime Minister, you should probably attend your first political meeting. So I went to my first ever political meeting. I showed up. It was in a place called Lacombe, Alberta, where I was born. And I showed up at it was an annual general meeting. It was my first ever meeting. And as I showed up, I was the youngest person there by 30 years. My mom was the second youngest person. And they were so excited to see a young person. They're like, someone who's interested in young. And this was before COVID. Nobody was interested in politics. There was 45 people there. And they elected me to be vice president of the board. Because I was a young person. I definitely can promise you I had no credentials to be the vice president of the board. I didn't know anything. But that led me to an experience, and that experience changed my life. And that experience was I attended the first ever convention of the Conservative Party of Canada. You might say, there's been a Conservative Party in Canada for a long time. True, but this was a new Conservative Party that had resulted from the Alliance Party uniting with the Reform Party and becoming the Conservative Party of Canada. Stephen Harper had just won the leadership of that party. And at this particular convention, and this gets important later, they were having a vote on whether or not to continue with Stephen Harper as the leader, because he just lost the election to Paul Martin. I was a big Stephen Harper fan. I've been following him. I've been reading about him. So I was super excited. So the homeschooled kid from rural Alberta shows up in Montreal in 2005. And I was shocked. Right? I'd never been to a big city like that before. Everyone was speaking French. I was lost. I didn't even have a suit. So I was just wearing a tie and a shirt and a blazer. And as I got there, I came in the back and I sat near the back, and then two people in suits came up to me and they came down and they said, hey, will you come up and sit at the front? I was like, okay, sure. So I came up and I sat at the front, and then the crowd starts chanting, Harper, Harper. And like I'm telling you, they were going, and people were excited. It's like what's happening with Pierre right now. It's the same vibe, right? The Liberals have been in power for a long time. They've screwed everything up. We have someone who's coming to fight back. And he comes down, and he sits down right beside me. Now, the way I like to compare this to people is, imagine that some young hockey player is at an event, and Connor McDavid comes and sits down beside him. Like, this is their hero. And so now he's sitting beside you. And that moment changed my life. Because it got me very interested in politics. And I'll tell you something. They were taking a lot of pictures there. And they took one picture of Stephen Harper, and it got posted on the front page of the Red Deer Advocate, which is the biggest paper in central Alberta, and my nose was in it. and my mom cut that picture out and kept it. Right? Because that was then. Well, after that, I was in. I put over 2,000 hours of volunteering from the age of 15 to the age of 18, door knocking, hoping to get the Conservatives in. Then I went to university, started the University Club. Now this is important, very important part of the story. When I got to Trinity Western University in Langley, British Columbia, they didn't have a Conservative Club anymore. So I took over the Conservative Club and I became president of the Conservative Club with one friend. There's nobody else. I just showed up. And I ended up recruiting about 24 people over the course of my time at university to go door knock, phone call, volunteer. I did 2 internships in Ottawa. Politics was my life. And what happened was, I got to Ottawa after I graduated in 2011. Now imagine this. 2011, Stephen Harper wins a majority government for the first time in 15 years. And I was just graduating university, and I put 2,000 hours of volunteering in. I knew people in Ottawa, so I got on a plane without any job offer or anything, and I said, I'm going to go work in Ottawa right after I graduated. Thousands of hours of volunteering. I got to Ottawa, I sent 100 resumes out in the first week, and no one responded. I dedicated myself to this party, to these politicians, and when the rubber hit the road and I wanted to come and serve, nobody even cared. Does that remind you of politicians you know? There's going to be a theme developing here, okay? So, second week came, sent out another 50 resumes, nobody gets back to me. So I called my dad and I said, Dad, I'm going to have to come back and do roofing again. Like, there's no jobs for me in politics. And he said, well, You might have to come home for the summer and do roofing. Hello. How are you? Welcome to the stage. Would you like to say something? What would you like to say? Okay. Thank you for coming up. One day you might be running for politics. Would you like to stay? So anyway, where was I? Oh yes. So I called my dad, we had the chat. He said, before you do that, I want you to write a letter to the politician you want to work for, telling them why you want to work for them, and maybe they'll give you an opportunity. And a fellow not far from here in Sault Ste. Marie named Brian Hayes gave me my first real job in politics. So I was working for him, and then a lady named Alison Redford, who's the Premier of Alberta, decided to go after homeschoolers. She wanted to change the law to make it impossible for homeschoolers to teach the curriculum they wanted. That made me really angry. So I wrote a letter to the local paper of Lacombe, condemning the teachers' unions and what Alison Redford had done. It was hard for my dad because someone at the church was a union rep. He got, why is your son doing this? But I cared a lot about this issue, and I actually went back to Alberta and worked in Danielle Smith's war room in 2012, where she was the leader of the Wild Rose, trying to take on the corrupt PCs at the time. Now, we lost that election, and I came back to Ottawa, but I made a lot of connections in Alberta during that election, and I got asked by a fellow named Nicholas Papalardo, who was at the time the manager of the regional advisors for the Prime Minister, to apply to a job at the Prime Minister's office. 7 interviews later, at the age of 23, 8 years after I'd sat beside him at that convention, I was hired to be the regional advisor for the Prairies for Stephen Harper. Now, why am I telling that story? Because the only reason that happened is I had no competition. I was the only one that showed up at 14. I was the only one who became the president of my campus club. I was the only one who went up and got volunteers. There was no competition, and I have news for you. There is no competition in politics. There isn't. How do I know? Well, the rest of my story is going to tell it for you. You see, our country has a national sin: apathy. We are not engaged in our politics. We are not good citizens. We're actually horrible citizens, and that's intentional. Because we were established as a colony. Canada is a colony of the British Empire and now of the globalist empire. And we have a colonial mindset. Our mindset is, they're in charge, we do what we want, we do what we can, but they just tell us what to do when we go forward. That has resulted in one of the weakest democratic systems in the world. How do I know? I'll give you a few examples. Who here knows what a nomination race is? So a nomination race is actually how your politicians are decided. It's an internal party vote in your local area that determines who's going to run for the party in the upcoming election. Now, in Ontario, it's pretty bad because Doug Ford now just appoints people all over the place. And there's hardly any internal party democracy. But where I come from, in Alberta, internal party democracy is one of the most important things to us. And we have nominations for pretty much everything. But here's what's funny. There are ridings where the sitting MLA will win no matter what, because they're blue. They're always going to be conservative. You have ridings like that here in Ontario. So the real election is the nomination. And on average, less than 150 people used to show up to these nominations. That means 75 people in a constituency chose their elected representative. And yet, people don't even know it's happening. People aren't paying attention. So, I get to the Prime Minister's office, then we lose in 2015 to Justin Trudeau. Which we all knew was going to be absolutely terrible, but I didn't have a job. So I became a campaigner. And I have run 40 election campaigns over the last I guess, 9 years now. The highlight reel, and don't hate me for this, is that I was the National Director of Field Operations for Aaron O'Toole. Now, before you get upset about that, I want you to imagine how hard it is to sell Aaron O'Toole. That's how good I am, right? Now, it was a mistake, but I also was the Get on the Vote chair and membership chair for when we united the Wild Rose and PC Party to create the United Conservative Party in Alberta. I was the director of Central Alberta for Jason Kenney's leadership campaign. I've been involved in almost every significant election that has happened in the last 10 years. And I became very good at politics, but then something happened. I decided I didn't want to take a medical experiment. And I was completely ostracized from my entire community. Suddenly, I was a pariah. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them was that, does anyone remember Andrew Scheer here when he was the leader of the Conservative Party? Well, anyone remember that he got kicked out because he was using donors' money to pay for his kids' private education? I got that story in the news. So I got kind of known as this, you can go look it up, political assassin. Right? Which is really all an organizer is someone who elects politicians or doesn't elect politicians. And so I got this reputation, and then COVID happened, and I wasn't even allowed to work in the war room. You had to be vaccinated to work in Aaron O'Toole's war room. Now, it gets kind of worse than that, because I put 16-hour days for 10 months to get Aaron O'Toole elected, and he didn't even invite me to his victory. So you think you hate politicians? You have no idea how I feel. I helped get Jason Kenney elected, and then I never got a call back. And I used to think that the reason for that was because I had a little bit of a problem. You see, in politics, there's a sport that's called drinking. And my problem is, when I drank, I would call politicians and tell them what I thought of them. Go over. So I get pushed out, and now I've decided not to take this experimental vaccine, and I don't know what to do with my life. But then, Jason Kenney, the man that I believed in, the man that I'd helped unite the parties with, the man that had told us he was going to be a candidate for the grassroots and freedom, arrested James Coates. Now, I'm the son of a preacher. I don't claim to be the holy or righteous person, but for me, the foundation of Western civilization is religious freedom. Amen. And if the government begins attacking religious freedom, they've attacked everything. So on April 7th, 2021, I declared war on Jason Kenney, and I said I would not rest until he was no longer the Premier of Alberta. Okay? And that actually meant something, because I'd been organizing for many years, and then I proceeded to realize how hard it is to take out a sitting Premier. Very difficult. But this is where the story is important, and this is why I've come to you today. You see, the story isn't the story of one man. The story is the story of people who stand up. I never would have had the opportunity to do what we did with Jason Kenney if 22 groups of what we call constituency associations, volunteers, citizens involved in their democracy hadn't demanded what we call a special general meeting to vote on whether or not Jason Kenney should remain the leader. Those groups had been involved, those people had been showing up, and they were able to push the issue so that we could have a vote. But the problem was, I'd given it, at the time, I'd given it about 8 months trying to get rid of Jason Kenney, and nothing was happening. Do you guys remember the Sky Palace picture where he's, during COVID, sitting, having a nice meal on top of a rooftop? We put that out. I even helped found a newspaper called the Western Standard just to attack him. Right? Like, I did everything that I possibly could, and nothing was working. And then he brought in what he called the Restriction Exemption Program, which really meant vaccine passports. And now I couldn't go to restaurants. My business crumbled because I had an international business that required shipping, and shipping went up 4,000% during COVID. At 32 years old, I moved back into my parents' basement. It was particularly humiliating for me because I left at 18. And I'm sitting in my parents' basement, not knowing what I'm going to do, been a political organizer, pushed out, attacked Jason Kenney, ostracized from all my friends. You all remember the dark, dark days of the fall of 2021 into the winter, right? And I didn't want to go on. I was ready to be done. I was ready to give up. I thought that the people of Canada were never going to rise. There was nothing we were going to be able to do. That this was the end. But there was a yak farmer from Olds, Alberta. His name is Chris Kinnear. And he came to me one day. We went to a restaurant where we had to show dog pictures to get in. It was like the secret code, right? If you showed a dog picture, you could go in. And we weren't allowed in restaurants at the time. And we sat down in a booth, and he said to me, David, we have to do something about Jason Kenney. And I said, oh, I agree, but I don't think people will do it. And he said, well, let's forget about whether the people will do it or not. Let's just do it. What do we do? I don't know what to do. That's what he said. Well, I said, okay, this is what you do. Get me 20 people in a room, and I will explain the plan to them. If they follow the plan, it will work. So, 3 days later, the yak farmer from Olds called me and he said, come down to Sundre. I got people. And I'm like, okay, everyone always says they've got people. I'll come. This is blizzard, by the way. That's Alberta tends to have. Drove all the way down. It's about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours from my parents' house. Drove down, got there, and there were 280 people. They were on, like the whole room was full, and they were all standing room only on the walls. Now, you'll notice in this story, at no point am I a speaker. At no point am I the guy leading, I'm the guy supporting the leaders. So I got up and I did a very homeschooler thing. I quoted a poem. That was how I started in Sundre. You gotta understand, Sundre is like North Bay on steroids, right? It's a working class town. These are farmers, ranchers, these are miners. They don't quote a lot of poetry. And the poem I quoted is a poem by W.H. Auden, called September 1st, 1939. And it goes like this, the part that I quoted. All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie, the romantic lie in the brain of the sensual man on the street, the lie of authority.
The room is full.
Which buildings scrape the sky. Now nobody
getting
knew
empty though,
saying,
but
and maybe you don't either. What I was trying to say is this: they don't have the power you think they do.
Amen.
They're scared of you.
Amen.
And if you show up, you can do something. And then I proceeded to have to convince a whole bunch of people who hated the United Conservative Party to buy a membership in the party, spend $100, and go to Red Deer to vote out Jason Kenney. And I thought that was going to be, these people hated the UCP. Jason Kenney was the one that was doing this to them. And that same party had done this to them. And I know a lot of people probably in this room feel the same way. Well, I want to back up a party that meets my principles. But the problem with that worldview is that's actually not how politics works. Politics is about coalitions. Politics is about organization. Politics is about people. And people like to win. So what I said to people was, a political party is not a thing. A political party is a collection of people. So if you want to think about what a political party is, imagine a ship, a battleship. I said we have the United Conservative Party. Do we like the captain or the crew? No. So the answer isn't to go out and fight wars in dinghies. The answer is to kick the crew off the battleship and go to war. And that's what we did. Now, the weird part of this is that first meeting happened in January of 2022. We started doing meetings, and it got to the point where we were doing 7 meetings every night with speakers all across the province. Hundreds of people were showing up, and it exploded, and as it exploded, the convoy started. So many people couldn't go on the convoy, but they wanted to have something to do. I remember driving to Quonsets, literally just big old sheds and you'd see the lines of cars coming to show up for the meeting. 18,000 people spent $100 and said they would go to Red Deer to vote out Jason Kenney. 18,000. In fact, so many people signed up that Jason Kenney lost his head and he canceled the vote. He canceled the vote and said, we're moving it to a mail-in ballot. Now, why do you think he did that? Because it's a lot easier to manipulate a mail-in ballot than an in-person vote. But I knew that he might do something like that, so I had told everybody at every meeting that I was at, as soon as you sign up to go to this annual general meeting, you're going to get a call from Jason Kenney's people, and they're going to ask you, who do you support? You don't have to tell them the truth. And about 15% of people lied to Jason Kenney. So he went and collected their ballots and brought them in, and he thought, I've got a 75%. I'm going to wait and tell the media. My wife interviewed him in Washington, D.C. right before the day of the vote. He said, I've got this. And then, of course, he showed up and he only got 51%. Because 15% of people lied to Jason Kenney. Like he lied to us. And Jason Kenney resigned that day, and there was a leadership race. And I went around the province again, did dozens of meetings, and I said, it does not matter who wins this leadership race if you think that they're going to fix your society. It doesn't matter if Danielle Smith or Travis Taves or any of these people win, because the problem is you think politics is about leadership. But the problem of politics is what our ancestors understood very well. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The purpose of democracy is not to find the best leader. It's to limit the leaders. We elected Danielle Smith. She's been probably the most freedom-loving premier in the entire province, entire country. But she's only that way because of pressure. She's only that way because she knows that there are thousands of us that are showing up to her constituency association meetings. There are thousands of us that are showing up to the annual general meeting every year. We're showing up and we're putting the pressure. So I've been given the 5-minute mark. Sorry I had to truncate that entire speech. But I want to talk a bit about how we go forward. I call it Tupperware parties for freedom. Okay? It's very simple. Now, I'm not personally into multi-level marketing, but they have a lot of really good ideas about gathering people, about getting them connected, about building community. And one of those is small meetings in people's homes. Now, I'm here because my ancestors settled Ontario. My ancestor, John Graham, was the first white man born in Erin Township outside of Grand Valley. My people have been here a very long time. I don't have a lot of hope for Ontario. I tell my people back home that I want to separate. I don't feel the same way about that flag that many of you do. Because I see that as a sign of abuse for my people, Albertans. We have been abused for a very long time by the Laurentian elite. In fact, according to the Liberal Finance Minister, Bill Marneau, the Conservative pension plan owes Alberta $310 billion.
What?
Yep. You go look it up, the reports come out by LifeWorks. The problem that we face as a society is that we don't have citizens anymore. It's not our leaders. It's that people are not showing up where they need to show up and putting pressure on those leaders. So what I'm asking you today is to become leaders. To realize that a homeschooler from Haines can end up in the Prime Minister's office only because there's no competition. I'm going to give you 2 other examples. While I was doing all those meetings, giving those speeches across Alberta, in secret, in homes, in quonsets, in country halls, there was one particular meeting in Lacombe. Guy was standing at the back, bearded, grumpy, looked like a trucker. And at the end, he came up to me and he started hammering me. He's about 32 years old. Just hammering me with questions. I said, get in the truck with me. I'll show you what I'm doing. See what you can do. This was an electrician from a place called Tees, Alberta. He got in that truck, we drove around for 2 months, and he's now in charge of Danielle Smith's tour as an electrician 2 years ago.
Wow.
If you get involved, you have no idea how far you can go. The important thing is that you have to understand where power comes from. It does not come from your ideas. It does not come from you being right. I ask people all the time, what is a leader? I get all kinds of definitions. I get all kinds of, this is what a leader is. That's what a leader is. No. A leader is one thing, a person with followers. So in Take Back Alberta, we have a rule. Your standing in the organization is directly correlated to how many people you can bring, and that's it. If you can't bring people, you have no voice. Because all we need is people. We don't need better ideas. We need more people showing up. We don't need the perfect set of values. We need more people showing up. We don't need anything else but about 3% of the population to start caring and being citizens, and we could revolutionize the entire country. Don't believe me? The Bolshevik Revolution was 3% of Russians.
Wow.
The Communist Party of China, when it was at its lowest, had less than 20,000 people in it when it was being driven out by I forget the name, but the Chinese government at the time hated the communists. They're the ones that live in Taiwan now. It takes a very small number of people to do a very big thing. You just have to know where to show up. And the final example I'll give is this. After Danielle Smith was elected, a lot of people were like, oh good, we've got the leader, we've got a good leader, she's apologized to the unvaccinated, we don't need to do anything anymore. And I said, actually, we've just put Danielle in the lion's den. We've just sent her to sit with all these Kenny people and all these establishment people, and not only that, power will corrupt her, because it corrupts everybody. We need to put people in there that will support her. We need to show up at the annual general meeting of the party and elect a board. And so that fall of 2022, 980 people showed up at the annual general meeting of the United Conservative Party, and we won every single board seat that was open, 9 for 9. That's 980 people, folks. If you think that you need to convince everybody, that you need to go out on the street and convince your average voter to do something, you're wrong. You just need to convince 1,000 people. How many people are in this room? About 200? Maybe 150? This room could change Ontario. The question is not can you, it's will you. So this is my challenge to you. You heard what Xander said. He's starting an organization. It started already. I think there's about 500 people in it right now. Join that organization. Join it and work with it. But here's the thing, and I don't know how he's going to run it exactly, but I'll tell you how we run Take Back Alberta. Your standing in that organization will be how many people can you bring. That's it. I think we got someone on the side.
Dan's mic's still on.
How are we going to do it? Right? How are we going to take back Ontario? Well, the answer is actually really simple. You need to go and you need to sit on your local constituency association boards. And people say, it's really, that's it? That's all I have to do? No, but this is how it works. You don't know how your political system works. You have no idea. And you can spend all the time in the world you want talking about it, or you can go and do politics and learn how it works. The purpose of sitting on a constituency association board is not to change the world. The purpose is for you to learn how boards work, because that's how the world is run. There are 10,000 board positions appointed by the Ontario government, and they don't have enough qualified people to fill them. And you know who fills them? People who've been sitting on boards. The NDP, the Woke, they show up for all these little boards. You know that. You want to know why no one in this room is sitting on library board, even though everybody recognizes the library is a problem, because you don't think it matters, and they do. So my challenge to you is that you can't just vote, you can't just protest, and you certainly should stop sitting around talking about this. It's time to become leaders, to become good citizens. And I think that my story, though truncated as it was, should give you all the evidence that you need that if a homeschooler from Haines, Alberta, there's 6 houses in Haines. If a homeschooler from Haines, Alberta can get rid of a premier, imagine what you can do. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, now we're going to move to Take Back Your Health. So, you know what? A quick 7-minute break, folks. Let's be back in your seats by quarter after, and then we're going to have our doctors come up. And you can speak to people. Speak quick.
I think I'm going to go with something. No, it's my arm. Break time. Bye.
If anybody's lost a set of keys, you can come see me. And I'm bottom. Please borrow with me. minutes, folks, 5 minutes. Okay, folks, so get back to our seats. We're going to have our doctors come up and shake things up pretty good here. Back to our seats, folks. David Speaker, you're on deck. Dr. Speaker. David Speaker to the front.
Hello, hello, hello. Is everybody here? Do people watch the show? People are out.
Just flip your camera around and talk to your audience for a minute.
Hello, you can see my shirt. Bye-bye. Oh, it's fucking cold.
I
Bro.
know. Oh, you have a toilet in the back of the truck.
No.
Yeah, you do. Your gray one's in the back of the truck, isn't it? We left it. We threw it in there
the stinky one?
Thursday. I don't care if it stinks. I might go throw it all.
Folks, we're going to start.
Go.
Back to your seats,
I'm gonna go
please.
get it. I'll be right back.
This afternoon as well.
Yep. Hey, Ronald. Nope.
No, I think we took it out.
Hey?
One of us took it out.
I did.
Okay, in a couple moments, we're going to welcome Dr. David Speaker to the stage. I'm going to ask everybody to come back to their seats.
Yeah.
Be surprised if they're audience. Be surprised if they're audience.
Yeah, there you go.
Won't
It'll be last.
And he won't be long. Very sure. Trust me.
It'll be last.
I know. It's the Disney. John just told me, look, we don't like public speaking. We're not, yeah, no. A lot of what we call a lot of public speaking and everything like that.
Okay, if I can ask everybody to come back to your seats, we're going to be back on stage in 1 minute.
What minute and counting?
30 seconds. I'm on.
That's what he was saying. Oh my God.
Okay. Yeah, that's what he's saying. Yeah.
He's named after his dad.
Okay, thank you everyone. I just want to say a few words about my good friend Dr. David Speaker, who some of you will recognize from his time here when he absolutely blew the roof off the place with 3 standing ovations in February of last year. I first met David in Welland at a Freedom Tour event shortly after the convoy in the spring, when we put a collection of people together at a time when not a lot of people were speaking publicly still after Ottawa. And we went to visit our dear friend Harold Jonker. After the convoy, there was a lot of us were down in the dumps. It was a tough period of time. There was a lot of wins, but it really took a piece out of us. And we knew that the path forward was getting together and speaking publicly. At the core of what we had to do was get together and speak the truth. That was our path out of this. It wasn't complicated. I met David there, and one of the organizers called me one day and she said, I have a courageous scientist who's willing to speak. The day before, Dr. David Speaker shared the stage with another doctor who just had his offices raided by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, when they were interested in the private information of his clients, his patients, to see whether or not they were offering early treatment. So that was the state of Ontario 2 years ago in the spring, when we had our event, and Dr. David Speaker absolutely blew the roof off the place. And ever since then, ever since that time, we've been lucky to have him up here in North Bay. He's been traveling the world. He's been doing events. He's been doing congressional testimony with his research, which has found DNA contamination in every vial of the vaccine in Moderna and Pfizer. He's going to be walking through the science, and he has been providing the facts and the truth to the politicians and to the general public that has been kept from us, and has empowered our politicians to enact rules and laws and change the course of history. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. David Speaker.
Wow, it is such an honor to be back up here in North Bay. It's been a wild time since, and I was told by Sam to eat this Mike, even though his
No, I'm not,
wife
but
is so
I did run for MP or MPP, whatever, up in my right.
All right, so
And the party that I was with
we're
was
all told
garbage.
mRNA vaccines are safe and effective. They're nice and simple, and just contain a small piece of messenger RNA in a pretty safe lipid nanoparticle, and they enter our cells. Our cells express spike, and they work well. They're 90% effective and stop transmission. We're also told that it remains at the site of injection, and thanks to Dr. Friedel, we all know that is false. We were told it just contains mRNA and a lipid nanoparticle and no DNA or nothing, which should not be.
No.
It will not enter our
Blue.
list. And now that DNA has been found, that these are
Blue with Derek Sloan.
fragmented and not bioactive. The whole thing of safe and effective, and these are not linked with the increase in cancer. And there's no possible way these are gene therapies, they're vaccines. I'm about to show you how all of that is false. So, I worked on a study confirming Kevin first findings about the DNA in the vaccines, and this led to earlier this year Joseph the Florida State Surgeon General calling for a halt of the COVID vaccine. So, what have I found? Well, so far I've looked at 38 vials. I have all of my shots. I've got Pfizer, I've got Moderna, I've got the Wuhan, the monovalent, the bivalent, and the new XBB 1.5 booster. I've got them all in my hand. I've looked at them in the lab, and I do not want these in me at all, knowing what, I've looked at these with PCR and mimicry. And we have found up to 186 billion copies of DNA for fragments of spike and SV40 per dose. And these are all within the lipid nanoparticle. And with mimicry, Moderna is almost 3,000 nanograms per dose. The whole FDA WHO guideline says it should be no more
Yeah, I was
than
with the
10
Blue Party and they were a
nanograms
piece of
per
garbage and there was no
dose.
help
Well, I don't think
for any.
that is less than 10, right? And all of the Pfizer vials contain an SV40 promoter enhancer. It's all inside the nanoparticles. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, if we look at the guidelines of how these things should have been made, if we follow the DNA vaccine guidelines, the amount in this exceeds or
I know, guys. I don't know why, but you guys should start posting it and sharing it.
That's there,
Yeah.
except it should not be more than
My numbers have been low, I guess, because I haven't been
100
broadcasting much on this one. But if you
our
should be sharing.
largest fragment size is 3.5, well, 3,500 base pairs in the length. And Pfizer should have disclosed DNA and the whole SV40 regions. Pfizer to Health Canada gave them that map right there and left off the whole SV40 poly-A tail to the SV40 enhancer, the whole AMR. And this is important because these are all nuclear localization signals, and SV40 binds to P53 in the cell, suppresses that, and P53 is the guardian of our genome and prevents our cells from turning into cancerous cells. So the guidelines were not followed. There's things in there which should not be in there. What does Health Canada say about this? Well, 6 hours after my study came up, Epoch Times put up this report, and Health Canada said, at first said, oh, it's not there, and then they looked and go, it is there, and then said the SV40 motor enhancer sequence is linked to a increase in cancer. These claims are unfounded and false, and that I show here Pfizer plasmid does not contain C sequences corresponding to the SV40. Well, earlier this year, through Colin Kerry's office, we submitted order paper questions, and Health Canada set on record in the House of Commons that these fragments are inactive, have no functional role, and are consistently below the limit required. At the same time, Health Canada emails Pfizer and asks, what is the justification for the SVB for in there? Well, what is the side of things? What's in there? Is this a big deal? So, on one hand, we're told it's no big deal, and behind the scenes, Health Canada saying, crap, well, why is this here? What do we do? And in the past few weeks, we have got on multiple order paper for questions on the answered report. Health Canada is both lying to MPs in government and to giving contradictory facts on multiple things. And Dr. Friday will talk on that later. If we look at the whole increase of cancer, who here has heard of someone with terrible cancer following the vaccine? So are things going up? Of course. If you look at all of the counts post-COVID vaccine in one, it's consistently going up in both morbidity and mortality for all neoplasms. And we're told there's no such thing as turbo cancer. Turbo cancer levels are not going up. It's no big deal. Well, we've known since 1999 in a David Dean paper that if you have an SV40 attached to a DNA fragment, it will integrate into the nucleus. So if we look at just the abstract of the paper, it says, although fragments, and in the vaccine we have DNA fragments in the lipid nanoparticle being put in the cytoplasm of a non-dividing cell, 72 base pairs SV40 answer. If you put as few as 3 to 10 copies per cell, cytoplasmically injected, it will move into the nucleus, cross the nuclear membrane, and integrate into the genome. They've known this since 1999 and are using this against us. Now, does integration occur? We are currently looking for an vaccine patient, but if you put the vaccine, overlay that on cell culture overnight, it will integrate into chromosome 9 and 12 into precancerous genes. And shown earlier this year. Going back to the whole concept of gene therapy. This is the gene therapy model here. So gene therapy is the use of genetic material to treat or prevent disease using DNA or RNA, and tell ourselves to change into a protein produced by the cell. So a Novavax vector goes in, puts this into this, and things change. We're all told that this is not gene therapy, this is the vaccine, right? Now, I learned last week this is a paper by Pfizer scientists. The plasmid used in the vaccine, it came from, and it says at Pfizer, we utilize prior plasmid DNA manufacturing technology expertise from Pfizer's gene therapy program. This is the gene therapy plasmid used in the vaccine in 2017. Pfizer started to build this new R&D hub in Chesterfield, and it pulled together and advancing the company's portfolio in biologics, vaccines, and gene therapy. And this was completed in 2019. So is this gene therapy or is this a vaccine? Are we being lied to, or can Big Pharma and Health Canada be trusted? Well, with the whole increasing cancer, there are multiple factors for this. One, in the lockdowns, people did not have access to therapy. I'm losing my voice. That's okay. So there's that could cause health choices, smoking, lack of exercise. There's to it itself could, but if we look just at the vaccine, particles and spike are toxic. They're shedding those proteins are pretty unlikely. Could be glutathione. Did they suppress the immune system? In these vaccines, all of the uridine has been changed to N1-methylpseudourine, and that causes ribosomal frame shifting, which means the spike made by ourselves is not all full length and the size it should be. There's multiple sizes, and that messes with our health and our immune system. All of the DNA in there, that there are genotoxic DNA addicts in there, and two, there's a whole pile in there of double-stranded RNA and RNA DNA hybrids. All of those are toxic to our health. And the reverse order. So on the plasmid, if you encode going forward, you get spike. If you encode going reverse, it codes for spheroid fibrinogen-like proteins. And what are we finding in deceased vaccinated people? Long white fibrinous clots. So, and that could have owned the optimization of it is so sophisticated. It could have only have been done through AI. Now, what does Health Canada think about all this? Well, they all still say it's safe and effective. EMA, the Europeans say, well, there's immediate availability of info, and we don't know the risk. Health Canada says that there's evidence sufficient to support a conclusion that these are safe and effective, and that the benefits outweigh the potential risk. And FDA simply says they may be effective. So, based on this, I think giving this to people is completely unacceptable. Now, who here has heard of the WHO pandemic treaty? You see, but before the pandemic, all of our governments, federal and provincial, out of SARS in 2003, made pandemic plans. COVID shows up, all of those plans are tossed out the window, not followed, and so the whole response was chaotic, unorganized, and they say, based on that, the world is therefore ill prepared to prevent another pandemic. Well, pandemics occur once in a lifetime, often. Infectious diseases are there, but there's nothing to fear. And before now, the WHO had an advisory role and worked as a group of nations, saying what's going on, advising, sharing info. They want all that to change and have the WHO define what is a pandemic and declare based on a potential risk, have the WHO as the main decision-making authority on how to treat things, monitor what drugs to use, and to if the nations do not follow it, they will be sanctioned. We are our own autonomous country and should have our own right. when they come, because to decisions and choices in North America often don't work for other nations like Africa, and we must be entitled to do what is best for us here based on what's going on here. So the last month I went to Geneva on June 1st, and I stood up and I spoke against the WHO pandemic treaty, and there were about 2,000 people from across the globe declaring this is not right, and we here must tell our own MPs that we do not want to be a part of the WHO at all. Now, yes, that they voted and the things weren't passed as they hoped. Do you think that they don't stop there? No. This week, WHO is meeting to help and hope to push through more of this. They're meeting this week, and their hope is by end of the year to have all of this agreed on and ratified. And so we must keep fighting back and standing against what is going on by the WHO. One of their things is to call a pandemic based on a international health risk. It could be human, animals, as they see fit. And one of these things has been this whole concept of Disease X. What is Disease X? Well, it's a placeholder name for the next pandemic. Now, as tell the chief scientific writer of CEPI says it's a virus that we don't know yet, but we do know it is out there. We do know it has the potential to spill over from an animal population potentially into humans. It's not definite, it's potential. Perhaps mutate or adapt itself and then begin spreading and killing people faster than we can contain it. So they don't know it's entirely speculation. And so is this not the fear mongering we've seen during COVID? And this should not be allowed at all by our government's health department. It's all about fear of the unknown and about a virus that we don't know yet. Such as avian influenza. Dr. Carol will tell us everything we need to know about avian But influenza viruses are naturally occurring. There's diseases and all. In fact, all species of the life on Earth, depending on the types, and sometimes they can infect birds and pigs and us. But they just show up, they're diseases and all, and in time will go away. Now, this whole concept of avian influenza found in cow's milk. So, it's a cool thing. Sure, it's in milk. Is it infectious? Can it be transmitted? Is it a big deal? And two, most of our milk, all of the milk I drink is pasteurized. And so if it is pasteurized milk, I doubt it'll transmitted to us, and two, there are worse diseases in milk to worry about than influenza. And so I think we need a common sense approach and not a fear-driven approach. And the last thing, God is in control of everything on earth. Amen. Okay? And we must live in faith, shoving Him first, and knowing that He is in control, and not being bound up and living in fear, being trapped in our homes for months. It's fear to go outside, fear of talking to people, and so don't live your life but by fear. Take back your life and your choices and your health, and live as God has commanded us to do. So, to wrap this up, much of what we are told about the vaccines is false, right? And two, we must not let WHO control things here. Yes, advice is fine, but we are our own sovereign nation and must stand on our own feet and make our own choices with everything in life, including our health. And last, all of us must sign and look up this. It came up last week. It's called the Hope Accord. The main points I've said for months. We must immediately suspend the COVID vaccines. We must evaluate with good science the whole thing of saying effective what is best. And two, if things are not good, take them off the market. We must immediately rectify recognize those who are vaccine injured and support them. Our government has caused them harm. They should stand up, take responsibility, and help them get back to and restore ethical principles abandoned during the COVID era, and find out what went wrong and make sure it never goes wrong again. Thank you for that.
So I just want to say on that note, we heard it from a molecular virologist. His work is available online. I've now seen him speak around the world, congressional testimony. The word is getting out. I do recommend, I know the whole court is taking off. People are signing in across the world, and it's our voice somewhere, and we're just saying no. Without further ado, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Neil Carroll. He's a immunotoxicologist. And he has a lot of great information for us. He's going to tell us how we can empower ourselves and what are the things that we can do to take charge of our health. Please give us a hand to Dr. Neil Carroll.
Get set up here. I feel a little bit like an Oreo today. I've got a virologist in front of me and a viral immunologist after me. So I'm the creamy fruit. I will do my best. So Dave is right. The last several years we've been given this whole propaganda to instill fear. And in my opinion, one of the things to do to overcome fear is knowledge. Knowledge is empowering. So I wanted to talk today about the next fear that we keep hearing about, which was H5N1 virus. And I'm going to talk mostly about this virus, a little bit about immunology, and a little bit about vitamin D. And I've got a couple of props here that I brought up so I don't forget to advertise later on. So let's get started. This is a picture that came out of a newspaper from India. So they're also receiving a lot of fear propaganda. I don't know if it triggers you, but it triggers me. Moving forward.
It's off.
Thank you.
Side.
Helps to turn it on. There we go. Here's another article that came out. This is from Reuters. Now, this is supposed to be a highly respected magazine, but I think they lost a lot of credibility during the COVID pandemic. Here we have an article dated June the 6th. Cows infected with bird flu have died in 5 U.S. states. This is fear triggering, right? We're all afraid of it. You see that? Words matter. See? Slow down. Let's read a little more detail here. It says, dairy cows infected with avian flu in 5 U.S. states have died or have been slaughtered by farmers because they did not recover. So I started wondering, what does the recover mean? If you're a dairy farmer, you're looking at milk production. So when they said recover, does that mean milk production didn't recover, so it was costing them too much, so then they ended up slaughtering? In the U.S., that's what they do. So I would like some more detail on what that means. Now, the next paragraph is a little bit of confession of truth. A U.S. Department and Agricultural spokesperson said that the agency knew of a few deaths, but the vast majority of cows recovered very well. Oh, that wouldn't have made a great title for this article, would it? Reuters was not able to determine the total number of cows with bird flu that died or were killed. The next paragraph, it says, some cows died of secondary infections, usually a bacterial infection, after being weakened by the flu virus. And that's a typical thing that can occur. The symptoms that these cows were experiencing called mastitis. So they had inflammation of the mammary gland. That's a common phenomenon that occurs in the dairy industry. It's usually caused by bacteria. In this case, probably those bacteria were able to take advantage of the environment after the infection with the influenza was occurring, and we get mastitis occurring. Reduced milk production and fever. Now, in all of the articles that I've come across, I never heard anything about the next statement. But I was down at a U.S. Dairy Association meeting in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and the one thing they pointed out was that these farms where there are outbreaks occurring, the cats are dying. So the cats are drinking the cow's milk, it's not being pasteurized, and they become infected and they die. So the clear signs of having bird flu outbreak would be mastitis, reduced milk production, fever in the cows, and your cats are dying. As David said, pasteurization will get rid of this virus. So we don't need to worry about it if we're drinking pasteurized milk. I would not advocate drinking unpasteurized milk, and I can tell you from past experience, as a city boy, I worked on a dairy farm for a summer, and I got very, very sick. I even brought my own milk. Turned out that the farmer's wife was making her own salad dressing using unpasteurized milk, and I didn't know that. So I got Campylobacter jejuni, which is, David said, probably a lot more serious and concerning than if you were to get bird flu. So another article, I'm not going to go into too much detail though, because I want to save some time. And this triggers a bit. The person who wrote this article is a former student of mine, who he was a master's by coursework student, and I advised that he not go on and do a PhD for obvious reasons. If you were to look at this article and take a look at all the hot links that he's provided in this article, they don't support his case at all. Now, maybe climate change is helping avian or bird flu virus to spread and evolve or mutate. That's a possibility, but that is really difficult to study. There's a comment that I've got, I won't go through all those, but this blue one here is kind of interesting. Avian migratory pattern routes are also changing. He attributes this to climate change. Now, maybe some of you have noticed, at least this year, we had robins all winter, actually. They didn't migrate down south. So I would say that if birds' migratory patterns change, meaning that they don't leave and go into another country, then that might actually reduce the risk of avian influenza spreading. So you'll see that there's a relationship with migratory bird populations. So very difficult to study, okay? He also was triggering some fear here again. He said that a Texas agricultural worker was infected with H5N1. These cases, he just mentioned one case, that's why I didn't take him on as a PhD. It doesn't edit well. These cases suggest that H5N1 is adapting to infect mammalian hosts. And I would argue, okay, first of all, this patient, the first farmer that tested positive, had an infection in the eye. That could have occurred from dust that was maybe carrying the virus, or maybe he got a little bit of milk in his eye. In any case, you got an eye infection. I think in most cases, if you were to drop unpasteurized milk into your eye, cow's milk that is, then you would likely probably develop conjunctivitis. The bigger question that I would want to know is this virus replicating, and is it shedding in teardrops, for example? So that would be good to know. We don't know that. If you're interested in the article, we can go and look at all these hot links. None of them match up with what he was trying to say, so that's a little bit disappointing. I would say two other articles that could come out in the conversation would be, I've got two questions here that I think are relevant and need to be addressed. The first one is, have gain-of-function experiments and or lab leaks contributed to the presence of new avian influenza variants? And I'll address that in a second. The second question is, has vaccination contributed to the evolution of new avian influenza virus variants as well? So here's an article that came out. It's not the primary author, but Peter McCullough is on this paper. And you probably heard of him, so we'll call it a McCullough paper. This is a preprint, so it has to undergo peer review. Whether it actually gets accepted as a formal article, I don't know. But it's an
an interesting article, and what they're exploring is there a possibility that gain-of-function experiments with this clade, it's called 2.3.4.4b of H5N1, that's the one that they've identified down in the States that's infecting the cows, has it been manipulated at all? Grown in culture under several cereal passages to cause it to mutate, or maybe even genetically modified. So they make a case that it looks like there might be some work that was done in the Netherlands and also in the US where maybe this is occurring. We need to explore it more, and that's certainly a lot more important question and something that we can actually do to mitigate the risk of a next pandemic in terms of avian influenza, as opposed to trying to deal with climate change. So down at the bottom here, they say a moratorium on gain-of-function experiments, including serial passage of H5N1, should be prevented, actually, or terminated, and this would help to mitigate the risk of pandemic. I completely agree with that statement. Second question is, has vaccination contributed to the evolution of influenza A viruses? And we don't vaccinate for influenza, but there are certain countries that do. China is a perfect example of this. Several years ago, they started mass vaccinating their poultry populations. And these are two studies that have shown that because of vaccination, we're driving selection pressure on this virus to mutate and evade immunity. So yes, it is occurring. And I would advocate that yes, vaccines are very important. They're important to help protect high-risk, immune-compromised individuals, but they're not to be used in a whole population, especially during a period of pandemic, such as what we saw in the last 4 years. Okay, David had a slide very similar to this. I want to talk a little bit about zoonotic pathogens and where H5N1 fits into this model. Here we have at the top, something called zoonosis and reverse zoonosis. So zoonosis is a disease that's caused by a pathogen that is from an animal that infects us. Okay? So there are different types of zoonotic disease. Some of them cause what we call dead-end infections. So an example of this would be West Nile virus or Lyme's disease. We get an infection from an intermediate host, but it doesn't become adapted to our body, and we don't spread it from person to person. There are some scenarios where we actually may carry a virus or a pathogen, and it infects an animal, so we call that reverse zoonosis. So I'm going to talk about pigs a little bit later on, because they are we consider to be a mixing vessel for influenza viruses, and we'll talk about why that is later on. But what you can see here is a wild bird population, so mostly waterfowl and shoreline birds. They are responsible for carrying influenza A viruses. And they don't typically manifest as causing an infection in those wild bird populations. So we typically see them as asymptomatic and low pathogenic influenza viral infections. However, they can be transmitted to other species, and in most cases, these would cause a dead-end infection. In some cases, as is the case with H5N1, it can sometimes cause animal-to-animal transmission or person-to-person transmission, depending on the variant. So it's certainly a pathogen that we need to be watching and monitoring in the population for sure. Okay, I'm going to pretend to be a virologist here for a few minutes. This looks familiar, doesn't it? Does it trigger anybody? It looks a little bit like SARS-CoV-2, doesn't it? Either that or a landmine, I'm not sure which, or a water mine. Here we have an RNA virus, similar to SARS-CoV-2. It has different proteins on its surface. The ones that are interesting include hemagglutinin, neuraminidase, and a matrix 2 protein. It's right here. So those are found on the cell membrane. The HA protein, or the hemagglutinin, is a really important one. That would be equivalent to the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2. It allows this virus to attach to host cells and to invade that host cell. So I want to show you a little bit about what happens here. Here we have a host cell. This could be an epithelial cell in the respiratory tract. And up at the top here, we have our virus.
And it's using that hemagglutinin to attach to the cell membrane. And that triggers the cell to endosynthesize that virus. The pH drops in here, and I think what's happening there is the cell is trying to destroy it. But when the pH drops, it changes the conformation of this hemagglutinin. And the virus capitalizes on that the hemagglutinin can attach to the cell membrane and allows the virus to inject all its RNA into the host's cytoplasm of that cell. And it also releases a whole bunch of different viral proteins that are involved in replicating more RNA, but also in manipulating the host immune response so that it suppresses the immune system. So there's some complex processes that are going on there. Ultimately, we use the host machinery to create more RNA. It's packaged into a new virion, which has to escape from this cell wall. We have a problem here, though. This hemagglutinin attaches to a specific type of molecule. It's called sialic acid. And sialic acids are different from every species, one species to the other, they're all different. And mutation in the genes that encode that hemagglutinin allow for influenza A viruses to attach to a specific host. That will become important later on. The neuraminidase, I think that's the orange protein on the surface here, it has enzymatic activity which breaks down that sialic acid, allowing this new viron to bud off and separate from the host cell. Normally you wouldn't be able to do that because it's too sticky. It also prevents virons from clumping together, which would not be too good in terms of their ability to affect other host cells. So hemagglutinin and neuraminidase are really important in facilitating infection of that host cell and also in releasing that viron to infect other host cells. So it would make sense then that our immune system has developed mechanisms to recognize those two viral proteins and to mount an immune response to them. If we mount an immune response and produce antibodies against the hemagglutinin, that prevents the cell from becoming infected. If we produce antibodies against neuraminidase, that would prevent the cell, the viron from separating from the host cell. In any case, there is selection pressure created by the immune system to allow that, or to drive that virus to mutate those genes to evade the immune response. That happens naturally during infection, but it will also happen when you vaccinate, especially if you're targeting specific proteins. So that process of mutation we refer to as genetic drift, and that's important. Next slide. Here we have a cool diagram. This is a very, very interesting review article if you want to learn more about influenza A virus. It's a 2023 paper from Vaccines. So we've already talked about this viron, we've talked about those important proteins. But those proteins and many other viral proteins are encoded by genes within these RNA segments. There are 8 of them. So it's like a deck of cards, but we only have 8 cards. And each of the important proteins are listed here. We don't need to go into those in detail, but some of them are interesting. They get modified or metabolized, and their metabolite is bioactive, and it manipulates the immune system so that the virus can survive. So that's pretty cool. The point is, though, is that if this virus infects, say we have 2 different viruses, one from a human and one from a bird, and they infect a host cell, we'll say it's a pig. They are genetically different. And during the replication process, they both require the nucleus here to create their own new cassettes of RNA. You can get shifting or changes to the card deck. So we say it's reassorted with these genes. And what happens then is that the offspring, the progeny virus, contains a mixture of proteins that will be found in both parent strains. That's a problem. Okay? That allows this virus to adapt to a new host. So that's one important thing. And we call this genetic shift. The other problem, though, is that there's the possibility that the new host animal that gets infected with this virus might not have any pre-existing immunity to any of those new modified proteins. So that animal would be considered immunologically naive, and it might be highly susceptible to infection. So those would be reasons why we would be concerned about influenza viruses, because they are able to rapidly mutate. And because there's always that potential that a new virus could have pandemic potential. If you take a look at there are different subtypes or genetic sequence of the proteins, of the genes coding hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Turns out that if you look at a whole population of avian influenza viruses, there are 9 different subtypes that have been identified for the neuraminidase and 16 subtypes for hemagglutinin. So if you were to look at all of the combinations, it's 144 different potential variant combinations of this influenza A virus, just based on those 2 genes alone. But we've got a whole bunch of other genes too, so there's lots more different combinations. It turns out that the H5 and the H7 subvariants are the ones that are of most interest to us because they can mutate very easily. They're highly prevalent, and they can mutate from low pathogenic to high pathogenic infections. So if they infect a bird population, they can cause massive morbidity and also mortality. And this is what we're looking at with this new clade that's been found in the US. It is a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. When it infects birds, it kills large numbers of those birds. Okay, let's talk about influenza infection in birds. As I mentioned before, this is typically carried throughout bird populations. The birds typically don't show any symptoms because it remains as a low pathogenic avian influenza virus infection. Transmission typically occurs by oral fecal route, so they pick up feces from another bird, that feces is contaminated, and then that other bird gets infected, but they don't show any signs. This is an interesting slide. What they've done in this study is they're trying to look at the contribution of bird migration and how that impacts infection throughout the world. And so here is a migratory bird flight route. You can see over here we have around Great Lakes, and over here we have parts of China and other parts of Asia. This is a Chinese paper, so they were focused on specific provinces in China. What you can see is that the birds migrate from point A to point B and then migrate back. So that's how we get spread of these avian influenza viruses. And then along the way, there are local domestic bird populations, waterfowl, where this reassortment occurs. We call this genetic shift. So that's how these new variants are created and how they get from one place in the world to another place. Okay. This slide is showing us that we're talking a little bit about influenza virus infections in mammals now. All of the subtypes that cause influenza in mammalian species have originated from birds. So they've mutated, evolved, adapted to these new species. And pigs are susceptible to infection with avian types and also human types of influenza A virus. And the reason for that is because if you look at their sialic acids, they carry 2 different types. They carry an avian type, which is called alpha 2,3 sialic acid, and they also carry a human type, which is called alpha 2,6 sialic acid. So that means if a pig gets infected with 2 variants, human, avian, then that mixing can occur and they can get sick. So that's kind of interesting. We call them mixing vessels. And so we should be monitoring pig populations. This paper talks about transport or movement of pigs around the globe. It's a little outdated now, 2020, so I'm sure these patterns are different, especially since the war in Europe. But what's interesting is they test for diseases like African swine fever and foot-and-mouth disease, but they don't test these live pigs for avian influenza when they're being transported, which is a bit of a shocker to me. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the connection with China. I've spent a lot of time in China. I teach at several universities there, at least I have over the past 12 years. And it's not uncommon to see something like this. When you're traveling across the country, you see large rivers, and all along the rivers, we've got farmers who are raising ducks along the rivers, which means that these ducks are in direct contact with wild bird populations. So that's a concern in terms of biosecurity and the potential for infection against bird populations. There's another image down here. They also have these live animal markets. And it's not uncommon to go to the market and pick out the chicken that you want to have for dinner. So you buy that chicken, it's live. They will slaughter it right there for you, package it up, and so you can take it home. Those birds that don't get sold that day will end up going back to the farm where they came from. So you can see there's a lot of human to animal interaction, and that poses a threat for exchange or the potential risk of exposure to some of these pathogens. Next slide is a personal experience. My wife and I spent a little bit of time, we call it a homestay, at a house in Sichuan province. And this was a fascinating and somewhat terrifying experience for me too. It's an example of where if you know too much, it's not good. Okay? So here we are. This home, a lovely family. They had excellent Wi-Fi, and they had a huge screen TV, massive, covering almost the whole wall. And yet they didn't have any heating or insulation in the house, and it was cold. So here's the kitchen. They have a huge wok, and they're using coal and corn stubble to heat that wok for the cooking. Now you can see some light casting out here from the kitchen. That light is coming from outside, and this is what we see outside of the kitchen. We see all the birds walking around. So that night, they processed a very loud rooster. I think his time had come, and we had that rooster for dinner, which was lovely. It was very nice dinner. Now, beside the kitchen is this room. This is where Grandpa works, feeding the pigs. So any wasted food gets fed to the pigs. Pigs live beside the kitchen. OMG. To add to it, this little cage back here, this is where the chickens live at night, so the dogs don't come and get them at night. So they walk those chickens in through the kitchen into the pig room and then lock them up at night. I had difficulty sleeping that night, and I kept thinking, I'm gonna die. Now, maybe it's just this house. So I went for a jog the next morning, and sure enough, I could hear pigs in everybody's house. So it's a cultural thing. In fact, if you look at the word family, this is a Chinese character for family. It's actually two characters. We have a roof and another character. That other character is Shi, which stands for pig. So pig under a roof represents family. This is still going on. So it's not so surprising that we see these pathogens that we need to be afraid of or should be watching in countries such as Asia where there's cultures very different. So it's also not surprising then that all of the variants, we've got H9, H5, H6 variants, they've all become exotic in populations of birds in China and also throughout other countries in Asia. And so it's expected that these will be primary sources for new pathogen that might have pandemic potential. Our experience with SARS-CoV-2 and SARS is showing us that we're extremely vulnerable in terms of we're only 12 hours away. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, Prime Minister JT told us the risk to this was low, right? At the time I was thinking, what the heck is he talking about? We're only 12 hours and it's probably already here. In fact, he was actually correct. The risk to us was relatively low in terms of the mortality rate for SARS-CoV-2. However, the risk was very high in terms of the heavy-handed measures that were used by public health to affect our own population. So I still worry about the people that are still in charge and what they might do because they're afraid. Okay, so how do we diagnose avian influenza? Mostly in terms of birds, it's clinical symptoms. And what they will do is they will collect a blood sample from those birds and do an antibody test to find out are there antibodies present in those birds. That tells us that the bird's exposed, but it doesn't tell us whether it continues to be exposed. It actually may have resolved the infection and just has immunity. In any case, if the birds test positive by that test, then we use PCR or sequencing to try to identify what variant of influenza virus that is.
And then we also have to infect newly fertilized eggs. And if the mortality rate of those fertilized eggs is more than 75%, we deem that it's a highly pathogenic variant of influenza A virus. So how do we treat the birds? Does anybody know how we treat birds when they get avian influenza? Sorry? Kill them. That's right. They are slaughtered. In fact, I did some looking across Canada over the last several years. 11 million birds have been slaughtered because they tested positive for avian influenza. So we use controlled slaughter. Sometimes we might use vaccination to try to control the spread of this disease. It's called a ring vaccination strategy to prevent one farm from infecting another farm. But we typically don't use vaccines because, in part, because it'll mess up this testing here, the antibody testing. Next slide. This is a slide specifically looking at H5N1. It's not a new pathogen. In fact, it was first detected in 2020 in Europe. And you can track where it's gone to other countries. We found it in China as well. We also detected it in a pet in Canada. We've had many farms over the last several years during the fall test positive, and it was actually kept quite quiet, but a lot of birds were slaughtered. And then it wasn't until April 2024 when a Texan farm worker tested positive, and he apparently got it from his cows. That's what we're told. I've got an interesting slide here. This came from the USDA. I've actually melded two slides together here. What we're looking at is all the species that have tested positive for H5N1, this highly pathogenic variant, since 2022 in the US. So that's what all these little different plots are. These are the species here. The next image that I've overlaid is these little darker regions here outlining each state of interest. This was data showing how many farms have tested positive. And it's not just dairy farms, it's also goat farms and sheep farms as well. But you can see here that in Michigan and Minnesota, for example, we would have, it looks like 5 farms. This is as of July the 5th. Whereas here, Colorado, we've got 15 plus farms that have tested positive. So what you're seeing here is an interesting overlap of the farms and also the prevalence in wildlife populations, too, mammalian populations. So that suggests that the cows and the wildlife species are all picking it up with these birds, which we now know are migrating all throughout the world. Really hard for us to contain and control it. So the take-home message is that they're advocating that we should have very strong biosecurity practices to make sure that our birds don't get sick. I know in the U.S. the farmers are starting to fight with each other. The government loves when we fight with each other. The dairy farmers are afraid to disclose that their cows are looking like they've got mastitis or their cats are dying because they don't want to have to lose all of that productive milk. So they will wait it out for a couple of weeks and then the cows will be back to normal. But then that infects the chicken farmers. So the chicken farmers are ticked off about it and they want to sue the dairy farmers. So there's some interesting stuff going on. Okay, so then the next comment I wanted to talk about is a little bit about the role of our government in monitoring all of this. We have a government agency called the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They are responsible for monitoring any imported animals or animal products into our country and testing for avian influenza virus. They also have a surveillance program that allows us to monitor commercial bird flocks throughout Canada. Maybe some of you have backyard chickens. I know we had them last year. Has anybody else got backyard chickens? They kind of go under the radar. They don't get monitored. And I know over there we got this, yes, good, they don't get monitored, but it would not surprise me if these numbers increase, if we start seeing it in cows in Canada, which we haven't yet, then it would not surprise me if they say, okay, no more backyard birds. We'll see what happens. Hopefully not. So the CFIA is responsible for monitoring and also if a farm tests positive, quarantining, destroying all of those animals, monitoring to make sure that the disease doesn't spread to other farms, and then at some point in time they give the okay to restock that poultry farm so that things can carry on. They will also monitor mammalian populations as well, so if you have a dairy farm or a poultry farm or a pig farm, they will also monitor that. Now, I don't expect that pigs or cattle would be slaughtered on a large scale. If so, this would greatly impact our food supply chain. Now, they wouldn't do that, would they? I would say no, but I'm skeptical. So, also, we have farmers that are becoming infected. So this means that Health Canada becomes involved. We've got two different government agencies, two pillars that don't know how to work together, and they're trying to figure out how to work together. So that's kind of a story to be continued. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the immune response to an influenza virus infection. And this would be a whole lecture on its own. I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes. And I'm going to split the immune system down into two arms. We've got the innate arm, which is very fast acting, and from an evolutionary perspective, it's very old. Even insects have an innate immune system. The acquired immune system is much more advanced. It takes longer to mount an acquired immune response, but it provides us with long-term immunity so that if we get an infection again, we will be protected from it. They work together. We used to think that they were separate, but they actually work quite well together. They need each other. So in terms of influenza virus infection, the data shows that early activation of the innate immune system will provide us with immediate protection, and that helps to mitigate the risk of severe disease. This sounds a lot like COVID-19, actually, because the same players are involved in recognizing and destroying viral infected cells. The problem arises if the innate immune system isn't activated right away, or if it remains activated for too long. So we get continued influx of leukocytes, those are white blood cells, into tissues like the lungs, and they can damage the tissues if they're going into the lungs for too long. We also get an inflammatory cytokine storm. You've probably heard of that term as well in terms of COVID-19. Both of those conditions would contribute to severe disease. It means that the immune system is actually contributing to the pathology, so we call that immunopathology. In any case, the innate immune system might be sufficient for clearing the infection. It might require recruitment of the acquired immune system, which will give us long-term protection. If this innate response is delayed, that's bad news. And also, if it is delayed, this will compromise the acquired immune response. So we might get immunomodulation or immunosuppression, which would also contribute to severe disease. And we also know that the influenza virus produces interesting proteins that have immunomodulatory properties. Take-home message there is, if you get the infection, you want to clear it quickly. Hi, Sam. If you get the infection, you want to clear it quickly. That's the take-home message. Okay, I was asked to talk a little bit about vitamin D, and that's another whole lecture, and I don't have time for that. So what I've done is I've provided you with two important references. We've done more research to try to understand more about how vitamin D is important in supporting the immune system. The big problem is that many of us are deficient in vitamin D, and when we're deficient in any micronutrient, then that's going to affect the immune system. So if you want to learn more about what we're calling immunoceuticals, these are compounds that support the immune system to work optimally. You can take a look at a paper that we published back in 2022. And in there, we talk about vitamin D, and we also talk about the importance of vitamin D protecting against COVID-19 and also avian influenza. We also just recently published a paper on vitamin K. The reason why we talk about vitamin K is because the supplement that we provide over there is a mixture of vitamin D and vitamin K2, and they work together to support the immune system. So if you're interested in either of these papers, I would suggest that you go over to our immunoceutical table over there, sign up for our newsletter, which Lori does religiously every month. No, I'm sorry. Okay, it's a team effort, and just check off the boxes, and we can provide you with some more information, and you can keep touch on what we're doing as a company and how we're growing. So that's the first. Second, a reminder is that we have we're participating in a conference this fall, November the 1st, and it's called Vitamin D Symposium. So we're getting famous researchers from around the country, some from the US if I remember correctly, and the whole day will be spent talking about vitamin D and its importance. My part of it will be talking about genetics and epigenetics. So each of us requires different levels of vitamin D to support our optimal health, which makes me to the next slide, Sam. I think I'm done. This slide is really important. What we're looking at here is a paper that came out in Nutrients in 2020, and they're monitoring the same individuals throughout the year, and they're measuring vitamin D levels, and they've got two levels that they have assigned. They've got a concentration that looks like around 25 nanomoles or less would be deficient, and levels that are between 25 and 50 are insufficient. Above that will be sufficient. What you see here is almost like a normal distribution here. We see that the levels are low January, February, March, April, then they go up May, June, July, August, and then go down again. They're up because these people are outside. You can get vitamin D naturally just by being out in the light. The problem is, North America, especially in the North Bay here, the angle of the sunlight is so low that we don't get exposure to those vitamin D raises that we need to naturally produce our own vitamin D. So we need it from our diet. If you eat lots of seafood, seal, salmon, things like that, you're probably getting enough. But if you're not, then you should be supplementing. So this points to the issue of our concentrations vary a lot from month to month, which means that we actually need to measure our levels in our blood to determine where we're at. So my suggestion is you measure midsummer, that should be your peak level. And then what you're trying to do is maintain that level throughout the fall and the winter and the spring. So you measure 3 months later, and then you can find out where you're at. Okay? So we offer a vitamin D test kit. It's down on the bottom here. We also offer different vitamin D products if you're interested in looking into them. We will also be offering a vitamin D for pets as well. That hopefully we can use to empower our own health. Thank you very much.
I think it's amazing how all these politicians and these average Canadians thinking so much about science, and we're listening to this. It's kind of amazing the conclusions that people come to without having an idea of what's really going on. So I really appreciate the knowledge and the work these gentlemen have done that really understand the science. So next one here, we have Dr. Byron Bridle coming up. You guys remember, you guys see the gentleman. You guys were on fire. Absolutely, only accountability everywhere. Loved it. And we're going to have Dr. Bridle come up and slice and dice. Is that fair to say?
Sure. Thanks. Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here in North Bay. Thank you for coming. So, you heard several interesting things from the earlier talk. So, Dr. David Speaker talked about the global pandemic treaty that's coming up. So, the whole rationale for that was, in fact, this idea that countries responded in a very chaotic fashion, that they were not prepared. And as was also pointed out, we all across Canada, all of our public institutions had a pandemic preparedness plan in place. We took those pandemic preparedness plans and threw them out. And I'd say if you take your pandemic preparedness plan and you throw it out, no wonder you're going to appear unprepared. So it's not that we're unprepared. And Theresa Tam right now is trying to argue we remain unprepared for a virus of animal origin, and she's referring to the avian influenza virus that you just heard about. And again, I want to emphasize that we're not. The pandemic preparedness plans that we had in place all across the country were actually based on and focused on an animal-derived influenza virus. All we need to do is take those plans we already had in place in 2019 and dust them off, maybe update them a little bit. We are prepared. That's why Canada can do that. But the reason why I raise this issue is, they said we were unprepared, In that pandemic preparedness plan, what a lot of people don't realize is there were multiple pillars that were supposed to be mobilized simultaneously to deal with an emergency. Only one of those multiple pillars was supposed to be public health. And somehow, I mean, those plans were thrown out and public health took over everything. There's those pillars like, for example, the economy, right? You can't spend $500 million a day locking every single person in the country down for a year and a half and expect your economy is going to be healthy. There were plans to make sure the economy was, that minimal damage is caused to our economy, not maximal damage. But somehow, public health took over. They became the god of everything, and they dictated exactly what happened. And so what I'm going to talk about today, I was asked to talk about integrity in science, which is that whole aspect of public health. The other one, the fact that they've taken over and control this, when disease X or whatever the next pandemic is declared, when that occurs again, as the current system exists, they'll be the ones taking over and dictating what happens in our country again. I remember that's never what was supposed to have happened. So I'm a scientist and I'm presenting lots of the science. I was asked to talk about integrity in science. So that part of it is already done. If you want to know what integrity in science looks like, you already heard the talks from Dr. Carroll and Dr. Speaker. That's integrity in science. So I can finish there and walk away. But what I am going to talk about instead is lack of integrity in science. So I also talk a lot about the science and present. But this is the thing. For people in the public, they've seen experts over the past 3 years get up and fight about the science and debate against it. And we clearly have scientists who know what they're talking about and speak with integrity. So rather than just talking about science in general here, what I'm going to show you today is at the end of the day, you need to figure out who can you trust, right? Who can you trust? And remember, public health officials are the ones that have taken control over how we respond during these types of emergencies. So I'm going to focus, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of messaging, public health messaging that shows that we need to gut our public health institutions and rebuild them as structures of integrity, repopulate them with leaders, scientific leaders of integrity. So before I start, a lot of you probably don't know who I am. So I'm just going to let you know. I'm an associate professor at a university. Okay, so I'm a Canadian academic viral immunologist. I specialize specifically in vaccinology for the promotion of human-focused health. All right, so I know what I'm talking about when it comes to vaccines. I've developed all kinds of different vaccines. When the COVID-19 pandemic was declared, I was recognized as a Canadian expert in vaccinology and sought after by mainstream media. I was interviewed by on shows like W5 and the West Block and all kinds of legacy media outlets, right? That was recognized. Then I started recognizing early on that there were a lot of public health policies being implemented that were not following the science. And I spoke up about these. One of the things I think that many of us have all united under is the fact that we need to protect our next generations, our coming generations. They need to live with the same freedoms that we were able to enjoy, and they need to be allowed to develop their own critical thinking skills and hold on to those and think for themselves. So I've stood up and spoken out lots of times in support of our children. So one of the things early on, my youngest son, had a classmate who tested positive by the PCR test for SARS coronavirus 2, which may or may not mean they had COVID-19, the disease. All these healthy kids were sent home and forced to learn remotely, but they were placed under what was known as isolated quarantine. And what this essentially was solitary confinement. 2 consecutive weeks of solitary confinement. We don't subject criminals to 2 weeks of solitary confinement. It's considered too inhumane. So I spoke out about these abusive policies to try and help other parents stand up against them. Then one of the things that was interesting and surprising to me is I gave an interview way back in May 2021 where I didn't do anything differently than what I had done prior to that. I simply spoke scientific truth. So I was asked a question about whether the modified COVID-19 RNA shots might be linked to cases of myocarditis. And I postulated that there was the potential for them to be linked and explained some potential mechanistic mechanisms, potential scientific mechanisms that could link this. Well, it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my world after I said that. The censorship, there was a massive, really well-organized global defamation campaign launched against me to completely destroyed my career, that still runs to this day, still occurs to this day. And that was really remarkable is I got invited to present at a parliamentary press conference. So I went to Ottawa. This is the same podium that Justin Trudeau often speaks from. It was a press conference. I was there with a couple of colleagues, and we were to talk about concerns with censoring scientists and physicians across the country, especially during a public health crisis. And this was the first federal parliamentary press conference in the history of Canada that was censored. And yet the focus of the conference was censorship itself. And so at the podium, a lot of people realize when I'm speaking at this podium here, it was this room would be, the space might be about half of what's in this gym right here. And often it would be full of reporters and cameras and everything else, right, that want to ask questions and stuff. I'm sitting there, and what I'm actually looking at is a completely empty room. Completely empty room. It was completely censored. And I'd like to point out, not one other MP was there in support of this. Not anybody. Nobody was there. That includes the Conservative Party. So it was really quite remarkable. It was actually scary to be in our Parliament building and see that level of censorship occurring of free speech.
Wow.
But the point is, I refuse to let scientific truths be censored. And so what I'm going to point out to you today, I'm going to provide you with two cutting-edge pieces of information that I think. So again, take this into the context of science. All of us have family and friends or colleagues who think we're crazy, right, for having resisted the narrative. So what I'm doing here is I'm equipping you with information where you can take them and show them the people that they trusted. And they have to ask themselves now, can I trust these people that I place my faith in? This is the other thing that I wanted to mention. The reason why these two examples that I'm going to present to you right now are so important. I have served as an expert witness in, over 24 cases now related to COVID-19 around the world. And I just keep hearing judicial notice, judicial notice, judicial notice. What is judicial notice? Judicial notice is this. Experts like me, if we have something to say, we've got to go to court and we've got to defend ourselves. We have to show the evidence, prove the evidence to justify that what we are saying is the truth. Judicial notice says that places like Health Canada, right, all of our public health agencies, that whatever they say, they can say whatever they want is taken as the gospel truth in our courts. They don't have to come to court, they don't have to waste their time to defend it because they apparently have better things to do than people like me. And so this is the thing right now. The reason why this is so important is because it completely blows up this whole concept of judicial notice, that our public health officials are telling the truth. I contend that if a public health official is caught telling one lie, they're a liar. By definition, they're a liar. And you have to start questioning everything else that they have said. If you can identify one lie that somebody has said, you can't take judicial notice for that individual at an organization again. So that's why this is so important. So first of all, British Columbia Centre for Disease Control and Provincial Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Bonnie Henry, this is an example from British Columbia, have been caught being deceitful. And this is very important. So a lawyer in British Columbia obtained through a Freedom of Information request a 1,312-page report. And if you want more details, I recommend you go to my Substack article that I wrote about this. Right at the very top of the Substack article is the report. All right, I've provided it for anybody around the world who wants to get it. Okay? And then also, in terms of Rebel News, actually did a story about the Substack article, where they really summarize it very beautifully, so you can also see information there. And this is the thing. It was a 1,312-page report. I'm just going to pull out a few excerpts to show you something very, very important and very, very enlightening. See, this is the case where you can point people who have not wanted to question the narrative, right? And then you don't have to point them to somebody like me, and they'll say, oh, this person is a misinformation spreader, and they can fact check and so on. That's why I'm going to show you with your own eyes, and you can put this in front of people, right, who have been bought into this narrative. So, what we discovered. So this is information that was hidden. They thought was locked behind closed doors, but through Freedom of Information requests, you can, from government agencies, get information released. So these are communications that were going on within the BC Centre for Disease Control. And they were discussing the side effects of the COVID-19 shot. But what I'm showing here is a table. So for months, they were collecting data in these tables, and they were reviewing them in weekly meetings. So what I'm showing you here is the data from the meeting that they held 1 week before they started providing information to the public about the side effects of the COVID-19 vaccines. But they have been accruing this data for many months and having reports like this. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. These two columns, or sorry, these two rows here are showing. The first one is total adverse events. What an AFI is, AEFI. That's an adverse event following immunization. That means something went wrong. All right, there's a medical problem following the receipt of the vaccine. And then this is the one that I like to focus on, the serious adverse events. Because at the end of the day, mild ones, moderate ones, we're not concerned about, but nobody wants serious side effects, serious problems, right? Coming from any kind of medical intervention. And then this is a very important column. In court, I have tried to produce this information from public databases, but it's very difficult because you can't get data that directly aligns, so it's very hard to do an accurate comparison. But I've always pointed out, this is the thing. How we've been monitoring the safety of these vaccines. They weren't monitored properly in the clinical trials. The control groups were vaccinated at a median time of 2 months. So we had 2 months of safety data, that was it. So the safety monitoring has been done through what we call passive monitoring systems. So this through voluntary reports. And we know that dramatically underestimates the true number of adverse events that have occurred following immunization, maybe up to 100-fold. But the whole point is, it underestimates. So the numbers don't really have any meaning in and of themselves. It's very difficult to get a context to what those numbers mean, because the numbers actually are relatively small. They're underestimates. So I've always argued, if we could get from the same database, have a comparator, a proper comparator that people understand, all of a sudden you can place these numbers into a context. And I've always argued a great one would be the flu shots, the historical flu. Lots of people get the flu shot. People know, and you just heard, people understand what the risks are from influenza, and they understand that the flu shots aren't always the greatest and so on. And the key thing is it's voluntary. Everybody's allowed to make their own informed decision as to whether or not they want to get a flu shot. Right? You do your own personal risk-benefit analysis based on the information disclosed to you. And these public health officials have admitted right here that they have affirmed that this is a great way to do it. So what they did here is they actually looked at the number of adverse events and all these other things and compared them to the historical flu vaccines. What did they find? Up to March 25th of 2021. This is the key thing. What they identified here is that the COVID shots were 16 times more dangerous. There were 16-fold more serious side effects coming from the COVID shots than historical flu shots. Did you ever hear that? No. Did public health officials ever tell you it was 16 times more dangerous than the flu shot? This is very important because we understand that if you're outside of the high-risk demographics, which are the frail elderly and people with multiple serious chronic illnesses, the risk from COVID-19 was no greater than the flu, and for children, much less so. That's very important. So if you're talking about a disease where the risk is no different than the flu, or actually less risky than the flu for kids, but the vaccine for it is 16 times more deadly, would that not have impacted things? And how would you ever be able to mandate such a shot?
Right.
So let me show you something. That's what they had in the data. Well, they said the numbers here are now small, so I just want to point that out. But nevertheless, they have it in their table here. Hospitalizations from the COVID shots compared to historical flu shots. 13.6 times more hospitalizations from the COVID shots. 24 times more deaths from the COVID shots than the flu shots. That's what they were looking at. So then what did they do? 1 week later, so that they were accruing this data. So that was the most recent data they looked at. The next week they went public. They said to the public wanted to know what is the safety profile, or are we saying safe and effective? So what did they do? And I want you to see. Here it is right here. Attached is the final version of this week's and first public COVID-19 adverse event following immunization report. You saw what they were looking at behind closed doors. Now let's look at what they revealed to the public. This is what they revealed to the public. So on page 1 is this. First of all, they said no safety signals have been identified in the reports received in BC to date. Serious events have not been reported at rates higher than expected compared to background rates. Yet they showed it was 16 times more dangerous than historic flu vaccines. They had a background. They had a gold standard background rate that they were comparing to. And they outright said that there was nothing about background. Now let me also show, because this is very interesting with the numbers. So I'm going to, actually, what's very interesting, I want you to see with your own eyes. Let's look at one of these numbers here. So serious side effects, right? I just want you to take a look at this. And again, remember, March 25th. So just keep this in mind, this number, 144. So 523 total adverse event reports have been received, right? 144 were serious. So just keep that number, 144. Now let's go to these data that they reported. So I put the numbers here for March 25th, right? But here you are. So April 3rd, a week later, right? Look at these numbers. So the numbers 1 week later, they have 523 total reports. They have received 70 more in the intervening week. That makes sense. The longer the shots, more shots that are being given, the more reports that are going to be submitted. So they have 70 more reports submitted. Yet they report here 26 were serious. I just showed you they had 144. So they added that there were 70 more reports, and yet somehow the number miraculously and dramatically plummeted from 144 to 26. This allowed them to say that out of all of the reports that are being submitted, only 4.4% are serious. The actual numbers are 27.5% were serious. So this is what grabbed my attention. So even if all 70 of these, the new ones, were not serious, how can you possibly drop, right, from the lost roll here. So how can you have dropped from 144 to 26, right? That was a big question. So let me show it. If you go up, actually, to, yeah, okay. You can just click on that. Okay, there we go. Okay. So, this is how they did it. The number of serious events, that 144 dropping to 26, were dramatically reduced by manipulating the definition of a serious side effect. And I'm going to show exactly what they did. So behind closed doors, this was the definition they used. This is all this report, all these communications that were released very recently. A serious adverse event following immunization, right? For the purpose, so you know what, I just realized that this is actually reversed. I'm going to pull this all out. Yeah. So this is actually the reverse here. So this was the one that was behind closed doors. All right? Serious adverse events were defined as any of the following events, and there's a list here. And you'll see in green here, or any of the following outcomes recommendations: hospitalization, permanent disability, incapacity, death. Now, when they actually went public, right, you can see even right here, they say for the purpose of this report, right, for the purpose of this report, a serious adverse event is one that resulted in the same thing they have here: hospitalization, permanent disability, incapacity, or death. Everything in purple they removed from the definition. That's how they caused that number to plummet. So in other words, anything where the physician recommended no further immunization. But I want you to look at things that they removed from the list. Anaphylaxis, Bell's palsy, they did all kinds of things. Encephalitis, that's inflammation of the brain. You're telling me that's not serious? They have things like paralysis. So anybody gets a vaccine, you walk away, you're paralyzed? That's pretty minor, isn't it? Very minor. Can you believe it? That's what they took out of this list in order to make that plummet. It's absolutely incredible. Right? This is fraudulent manipulation of data for the sole purpose of misleading people. All right? They misled people to believe that the vaccines were far safer than they were by doing this. All right? And so where was the informed consent? Transparency and integrity should be hallmarks of public health. All right? So that's the example for British Columbia. But let me give you another one from Ontario. So I want to find out, if you're interested, this is a great video to go and see. The Canadian COVID Care Line has put together a video that outlines what I'm just going to show you. Dr. David Speaker mentioned this concept of an order paper. All right? So, an order paper question. So, an order paper question, this is what allows members of our parliament to get information about our government agencies. So, one was put in. Now, first of all, I want to point this out Christine Elliott. Christine Elliott was Ontario's Minister of Health. And on November 30th, 2021, this is what she said in our parliament. All right? But it's also safe. It has been tested. We are recommending that women who are pregnant do receive the vaccine for the protection of themselves, protection of the baby as well. It has been accepted by Health Canada. Women who are pregnant, it is entirely safe and recommended for them to receive the vaccine. Okay? So if you can just play the video, I want you to hear her, all right, with your own ears. Now you got that 20 over. So listen to what she's saying, all right? I showed you what she said, but I want you to hear because, again, it's important for you to hear the words coming out of her mouth. And then I'm going to show you the information that we got. So when the Member of Parliament submitted a question asking what the scientific basis was for this claim that the COVID-19 shots are safe for pregnant women, I'm going to show you what the response was from Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada, right? And I want you to, we're going to contrast these. If it's too much, we can just slide.
It is also safe. It has been tested. We are recommending that women who are pregnant do receive the vaccine for the protection of themselves, protection of their baby as well. And that is has been proven. It's been accepted by the Health Canada, by the Health Organization, by
Okay,
the
so that's
FDA.
good there. So just bring up the slides again. So you heard that. And the important thing here is she stated clearly in Parliament that it was approved by Health Canada, right? You heard that with your own ear. This is why it's important information, right? That you can show friends and family who, not believe you when you question the narrative. So she said, but it is also safe. It has been tested. That was on November 30th, 2021. I want to point out that the response to this that was received, or actually, first of all, this is very interesting as well. The companies actually provide their own drug monographs. I'm showing you the example for Pfizer's, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And this is after she's made that statement, all right? That's why the date is reported. So this is March 4th, 2022. What did Pfizer have to say about their own product? The safety and efficacy of Comirnaty in pregnant women have not yet been established, is what they stated. Yet she claimed they were safe, perfectly safe. It is unknown whether Comirnaty is excreted in human milk and risk to the newborns and infants cannot be excluded. That's what they said. That's what the company said. Now, the federal order paper, this is what I want you to see. So this question was posed: what is Health Canada's scientific base for claiming these vaccines are safe for pregnant and lactating women? And note that this was received December 13th, 2023, more than 2 years after Christine Elliott made that statement, which caused pregnant and lactating women all throughout the province, many of them, to feel coerced or mandated, ultimately mandated in taking these shots. Right? This, and again, she said, it has been accepted by Health Canada, women who are pregnant, it is entirely safe and recommended for them to receive the vaccine. But again, I emphasize, December 13th, this is what Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada told us in their response, none of the COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers sought indications for use in pregnant or lactating women. They didn't even ask for the product to go into these pregnant and lactating women, all right? Nor did they submit randomized controlled trials in pregnant lactating women for regulatory evaluation. The product monographs included statements, I already showed you this, right, about the uncertainties related to pregnancy and lactation. Further, again, she said it has been accepted by Health Canada. It is entirely safe and recommended for them to receive the vaccine. Also in this response on December 13th, they state, as indicated in the specific product monographs, it is noted that the safety and efficacy of these vaccines in pregnant women have not yet been established. No indication for use in pregnant or lactating women was sought by the vaccine sponsors or authorized by Health Canada. And I'll end with this. Also, on December 13th, this was also what they included in the response. Health Canada has not approved any safety claims with regard to pregnant and lactating women. So how was it that 2 years earlier, Ontario's Minister of Health could stand in Parliament and claim that Health Canada had shown and approved this as being safe and effective for pregnant women? Right? I just want to show you this with your own eyes, and I'm going to stop there. But there's two examples, and when you cannot trust our public health officials, it's done. I'm sorry, it's done. The only solution at that point was to gut these agencies, get rid of these people, and replace them with people with integrity. Wow. There's a lot of this information. I just encourage everybody to follow Dr. Neil Carroll, Dr. Barb Bridle, Dr. David Speaker on Twitter. There's a lot of this information is available readily on Twitter. They point to their research, and you can share it. Share it as much as you possibly can. The only way out of this is to educate each other and keep pushing. The other thing we can do is pull the levers of power, is be at the right place at the right time. So educate each other, show up at the right place. We have one more guest speaker. I'd like to invite Maggie to the front. She's done a wonderful job working in different communities and teaching people how to communicate and how to make change at City Council. And she's done an incredible job. I want to point to Gather 2030, which is her Substack, and I encourage everybody to sign up. You can learn about how you too can make a difference in your community and engage with your leaders. And then also Kickly, which is her initiative, which she's shared very well throughout Canada, to change the relationship between our municipalities, the people, and the UN, the United Nations, which has spent the last 20 years quietly rolling out programs that are undermining our rights. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Maggie to the stage.
Really good to be here with all these amazing people and speakers. Take Back Ontario. I really like Take Back Ontario and the crew that we have coming together, and the power of the network coming together. And this idea that the world is run by those who show up, right? And just want to thank all of you for being active and involved and not giving up over the last few years. What we're up against, it is quite an evil agenda, isn't it? So what I'm finding is that when we do start to engage in our civic duties, we're in a situation right now where I think that the pendulum is going to swing, and it is swinging. And so we've been doing things. So it's not time to give up. This time last year, I went and I thought, okay, I'm going to do a delegation at my town council. It looks like Agenda 21 is being implemented here. So I looked at their environmental committee reports, and I saw that they were targeting our mobility and aiming for net zero. And I went in and I did a 5-minute delegation. And that seemed to wake a whole bunch of people up. So I thought, you know what, I think we're on to something. It even made it so that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, flew into Peterborough to meet with our mayor and our CAO. So I kind of knew I was on to something, and then as Dr. Bridle mentioned as well, looking into it even deeper and realizing that Agenda 21 was actually drafted by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and an organization called ICLEI, which I have stolen the logo from, and put a K in front of it because we want to kick them out. ICLEI is an International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. So what they've done is they've partnered this international organization that was founded by the United Nations with the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They drafted Agenda 21, got it signed in Rio de Janeiro. Agenda 21 is a global to local agenda, and it's being done at that local level in our councils voluntarily, and they're tricking our councils into adopting voluntary programs through motions. And the way things work in the council is we can get them to reconsider these motions, and that's exactly what we started doing. And we've succeeded now in getting the first Canadian municipality to opt out of their main UN directive program. You know, this makes me so happy to know that there is a solution to this problem. Here in Canada, it's such a big country, right? Look at how hard it was, and under what circumstances we're required to get so many people into Ottawa, right? And like it was very necessary for us to really show up there that day. But we have this global agenda that is being implemented through our local town halls, and we can all get to our town halls, right? So what we're finding is it's actually not taking that much of an effort to get these programs out. So I'll just go into Thorold, because I know I don't have that much time, but you can check it out on the website here. So a counselor reached out and he saw what we were doing at the local councils, and he wanted to get this program for the Partners for Climate Protection Program out, and it is their main program, I'll say. So we got a team together, a main team lead, Duncan, about 4 delegates from the local area, a lady that went around, a couple ladies that went around and gathered signatures. We emailed the council, we did some delegations. We just kind of put the pressure on, and by the end of it, the tactics and the strategies that we used were so effective that the city staff actually made the recommendation to opt out of the program. The staff that tried to bring it in, she quit. The clerk that was pushing it quit. And the staff that were left, they recommended the opt-out. And the chair for their environmental committee the next day after quit. Right? So I think that this is what we're up against. We're up against 1 or 2 councillors, especially in some of our rural municipalities across the country. The cities are going to be harder to get, but that's okay. It really comes down to the power of influence, right? If we didn't show up in Duro-Dummer, they would have passed that official plan, but we showed up. We pointed out what was wrong with it. We brought 60 people. We did our delegation. And those small town councillors agreed with us. And they took it to that next county level the next day, and those mayors for the county also agreed with us. This official plan is a death sentence to their municipalities. It's clearly reducing their population growth in the rural municipalities, and it's in 20 years, they don't want people living on the land here in Canada. So lastly, I've laid out in my most recent article the strategies that I think are most effective. And there's things that all of us can do to move this forward. And one of the suggestions I'm putting out there is that we take the time to get back involved in understanding our civic engagement strategies that we can use. And they took civics out of school, and for a 2-hour read, I recommend Mary Baker's book, Citizen Ninja, Stand Up to Power. She's from the States, but they've done such a fantastic job down there. And she lays out these strategies that 2-hour read, you're going to be so much more effective at influencing the people in these positions of power that have the ability to reconsider these motions and get these programs to withdraw. So I have a lot more I want to share, but I know we're running low on time. Just trying to think.
Wanda, Maggie is from Peterborough. She has spoken in Toronto in the past.
I really do. I really do. I think we can.
I'm not
take
sure
back
she
our
was going to
country
come to the
at
protest
that
that
local
Derek
level
puts up
and at that
because of
provincial
the
level,
animosity
and
that they
there
used to
are
have in the past.
strategies that work, and it really comes down to us pulling
But I know
together a
Maggie does
network here,
Toronto and
working
stuff like that.
together,
Her and
we got this. So
her and Jody Lidgerwood just did an event. Her and Jody just did an event out
I just want to say one more
Toronto.
thing, and
Durham
that
is, I
Maggie's
believe.
such a great teacher and instructor, and she's always willing to share, and you can, join her on Friday nights. You can join Take Back Ontario. She'll, as a member of Take Back Ontario, she also speaks on our Wednesday night meetings at 7 o'clock, so you can tune in on our Zoom meeting. I would encourage you to come up to our table, ask us how to get invited to the Zoom meeting. And then with Gather 2030 in Pigleach, that's Fridays. So you can hear more about Maggie and learn and understand how you go about the process of making a difference. So thank you very much, Maggie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Maggie's from Peterborough, Wanda.
It's the long weekend of September 1st. We're going to be teaching some courses there as well, right?
we're going to be in Elliott Lake the last long weekend of the summer at the Dunlop Lake Lodge. So
Yeah, that's where we're going.
welcome to come to that. Pardon?
Did you say Laurentian Lodge?
Dunlop Lake Lodge last weekend of the summer. So rural Ontario, come camping and go and learn how to take back the north.
Not least, I know we boiled over a little bit, folks. I'd like to have a panel, but we're going to have to cut that out and just wrap it up with the doctor of trucking.
I'm definitely not a doctor of trucking, but it is definitely a profession that's became popular a few years ago because of a convoy, and it was an honor and a privilege to be in a truck with my wife.
Yes, they were.
To get to be the
Yes,
first
Wanda, they
official
were.
truck into Ottawa has been an experience. I'll never regret. And I think what we're all scratching our heads on is what happened in the last few years. But what I can say is what happened in the last few years is I've met a lot of awesome, wonderful, beautiful Canadians. And I even being here today, there's so many familiar faces. The doctors have spoken out right from the beginning. They inspired us to do the right thing. And when the truckers came up with an idea, it was a beautiful moment because so many Canadians from all walks of life, from all nationalities, came together and supported and supported their country, stood up for their country together. So yes, it was the truckers that happened to have trucks that could drive up to Ottawa, we could sleep in our trucks, but it was the support that we received from Canadians that made the difference. And I wrote a few notes here, and it's some of the speakers were speaking about. It's very simple to make a change, to make a difference, and it actually is. I was a town councillor, a truck driver, ran a business, and was able to get in as a town councillor in beautiful West Lincoln. If a truck driver can do it with a grade 12 education, anybody can be a town councillor.
Yeah.
And what I also learned was, I don't know I'm not going to say what every county or township set up as, but we have committees that we look to fill with volunteers. And David Parker brought up the library thing, and I just like, wow, yeah, it's so true. We have committees that people can just apply for, to volunteer and be on the library committee. There's even a Santa Claus parade committee that you can get involved with, right? And that's what we start needing to do. We have opportunities. We just got to get off our couch. Like the American said that we met an hour north of us. He goes, you guys made us realize we've got to get off our couch. Yeah. And that's what we need to do. And we got to go back to our heritage. So we're talking about take back our health. What I want to say is we need to bring back our Christian heritage. Because that's what God blesses. And it's just been an honor to be part of this and to meet so many wonderful people. And if you're ever down in Niagara region, we have a camper that we can set up, whatever. But it's just awesome that we're part of a beautiful family, and it's an awesome Canadian family. And we sang "O Canada," and it's a beautiful national song that we sing when we sing about our country, because it's actually a prayer. God, keep our land glorious and free. But it's also a command. Sons, stand on guard for thee. We are sons. We need to stand on guard for Canada.
Amen.
God bless
And we have to hold the line.
Hold the line. That got Tamara in trouble.
Some of you may have wondered what this flag was. Hanging behind the stage here, and it has a beautiful story. It's coming full circle here today. It made it across Canada to the convoy in Ottawa, and I'll let David and Harold tell the rest of the story, but this flag is very meaningful, and it has been carried around the world in convoys to represent our freedom, our love, our nationality, our pride, and the hope for our future.
So in the past month, 8 weeks, I've been to the WHO headquarters, and there was a convoy between London, UK, and Geneva. And on my way there, I visited Harold's house, and he's like, "I've got the perfect flag for you to fly between London and Geneva." And so I've taken this from across the pond. It's flown on that convoy. It's flown at the injection of truth in Calgary, and Roger Hodgkinson's 80th birthday. And this is not a stain, this is a badge of honor. And this flag has a very important history, and I would like to, when you're done, ceremoniously hand this flag back to the owner, as much as I'd love to hang this on my wall here.
What I want to tell you about this flag is anybody who was standing on the side of the highway in North Bay, you've seen this flag.
Oh, yes.
This flag was given to me from a gentleman who, after the convoy, was wandering the streets cold without proper clothing. A gentleman in St. Catharines picked him up, brought him to Niagara region, had him stay at his house for 7 days until we could pick up our trucks that had been impounded.
Yep.
This flag left Manitoba on the back of Ben Rumpel's truck. When his truck was towed with mine, they're all in this big compound, and we picked up the truck, and he's like, I can't take this home with me. I think it was a little crazy, but I was like, well, I'd love to have that flag. So he gave me this flag, but it was just kind of neat to see it fly here today because I know it flew on the back of his truck on the way to Ottawa. And it's a fifth wheel state. So if everybody knows trucking, you got the fifth wheel which holds it. That was flopping in the wind and then would hit the fifth wheel, pick up some grease, then do that again. And yeah, this flag's seen some miles, and considering how many miles, it's actually in really good shape.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm never gonna let go of this flag, even though Ben Rumpel owned it. It's like, sorry, you gave it to me, and it's been pretty special. And to have it go to Geneva, come here, and I played, drag it all over was pretty neat. And I'm emotional.
Is this one in the back?
It's been beaten by the wind so much that there's no way there's any bacteria left in it.
Harold, will that fly over the House of Parliament building when we reform this country?
Keep it 5 years, 10 years, whatever it takes to get it there.
10 years.
So Harold, here's your flag back.
Thank you, brother. You're welcome.